by the year 2045, America is going to be a majority racially diverse country. And we believe that in order for companies and brands to remain relevant, they have to have a workforce that's reflective of these changing demographics and consumer habits and demands.
This is not about quotas. No. You've got to do this because you want to retain the absolute best people.
About 2 years ago, I attended Davos. What dawned on me really quickly is that those individuals in the room have known each other for years. Let's take the best elements of all these existing networks and let's put that into 2045 and let's improve upon it.
I think you guys are going to have a really winning combination of need and solution. Well, hello, everyone. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with yet another Infinite Loops. Today's guest, I have a special interest in, and let's get that out of the way up front because we're full disclosure people here at Infinite Loops. My guest, Porter Braswell, is the founder and CEO of an O'Shaughnessy Ventures portfolio company, 2045 Studio, a members-only network for accomplished leaders of color. But Porter, man, like going through your CV, I'm like, is there anything this guy is bad at? Like, you were the co-founder of what is it, Jopwell? Jopwell,
Yep.
Which is basically similar to what you're doing here. We're going to talk about the differences during our chat. But you're also you were 3 years starting point guard at Yale for the basketball team, won all sorts of awards. You're an author. Porter, welcome. I think you had me at hello maybe during your pitch to us.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited to be in the portfolio and to have had a chance to have, gotten to know you now. And it's been awesome. It's been awesome being a part of the network.
Let's start with the name 2045 Studio. I think it's very cool, but I want to let you tell the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So the name of 2045 Studio is that 2045, the year, represents the year of a majority racially diverse United States. And we believe that in order for companies and brands to remain relevant, they have to have a workforce that's reflective of these changing demographics and consumer habits and demands. And we believe that companies are not situated yet to remain relevant because their senior level of leadership is not reflective of these changing demographics. And so we're in the business of making sure that companies are retaining specifically their employees of color so that by the next time that C-level turns over, it's going to be more reflective of what this country looks like.
Yeah. And I think that the way you go about it too, because my next question is around how you're going to execute against this mission. Yep. That honestly is what got me so excited and to make the investment in the company. So if you'd share with our listeners and viewers the way you're going to execute against this mission, I think is quite
absolutely. So basically, if you've been doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work over the last decade or two, it's been a really siloed experience. There's been a chief diversity officer who's been tasked with doing it all. Maybe there's a diversity division that it's their job to make these workforces of tomorrow. Our perspective is that, especially with the changing landscape of what's going on within DEI right now, is that you have what we're calling an inclusion gap. Because DEI is going to be going from being this siloed experience into being distributed to all. So locally, at the team level, leaders have to be inclusive leaders so that all employees can feel seen, heard, and valued, which leads to higher retention and promotion rates. We believe that there's power in, first and foremost, executive coaching, inclusive executive coaching specifically. And that regardless of one's racial identity or background, everybody can benefit from our framework of inclusive executive coaching. It allows individuals to show up as good leaders. Those individuals that identify being of color, we know also need additional support. And so we make them 2045 members. And by being a 2045 member, they get access to a network of other individuals who've been tapped and identified by their company as being future leaders. And there's power in finding community with those that want to be retained and promoted at their company. So that as this community grows up within these organizations, they have a really valuable network that they have been able to find in 2045 of other leaders of color who similarly are dealing with the same challenges and obstacles that they're experiencing, but there's a general commitment from that network. Let's remain employed by this company. Let's stay here. Let's go through the challenges and obstacles so that when we get to the top, we'll have this network of people that have climbed together. Within companies, those that don't identify being of color, so typically allies, we have an ally network for them to talk about their experiences and their vulnerabilities and what they're insecure about in terms of how they show up as being an inclusive leader. And we create space for those conversations to happen. And then our perspective is you then bring these groups together. We break bread. We understand each other more. We have better empathy for my colleague, for the next person. And then ultimately, that's how you create a more inclusive culture. So we recognize that executive coaching is powerful for all. Different communities need to find communities that they can engage with and be open and honest with each other. And then it takes everybody to build inclusive cultures of tomorrow so that eventually, again, by the year 2045, companies remain relevant.
Yeah, and I love the organic nature of it. I love the network joining nature of it, because as you and I discussed before we invested, this sort of siloed approach to DEI kind of invited kind of the backlash that we've seen recently, because it was an other, right? It was like, it seemed like a bolt-on. And the way you're doing it is, no. We're going to be completely organic. We're going to take the things that everyone agrees on, right? Mentors are good. Allies are good. We're not adversaries here. We can both, as you put it, break bread together and discuss these things in a much less charged environment. I immediately thought of, when examining your company, I used to belong to YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And you have a lot of the similar elements to what you're doing there. Talk a bit about that. And it's basically, I love the fact that you also are having real spaces, right? So you've got a great space in New York. I think you're planning on opening spaces in other major cities. I just love the way that you're approaching this as, hey, this is the natural way that all of this stuff got done. And now you're not going to copy, you're going to improve. But talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I've been fortunate to have been in many rooms throughout my career. And about 2 years ago, I attended Davos. And it was the greatest professional experience of my life. And what dawned on me really quickly at attending that conference is that those individuals in the room have known each other for years. The backslapping, the hugging, it was like, wait a minute, they've known each other. And when they show up at a gathering like Davos, there's such good feelings and sentiments and business is getting done. And yet consistently, like most times, I found myself being the only. I was one of the youngest people there. I was one of the only African Americans that I came across. There's a lot of representation from different parts of the world, but I think I felt that there weren't many young African Americans attending that conference, and so I didn't have my network that I was backslapping and hanging out with, and I was trying to figure it all out. But it was clear to me that there must have been other communities that these individuals were a part of, so that when they showed up here, they had known each other. Came back to the States, started doing some research, came across YPO, Vistage, other incredible organizations that have been around forever. And it was shocking to me that there wasn't a community that was intentionally built for influential professionals of color. Now, there have been small nonprofits that do fabulous work, that have networks of people who gather at conferences. There are family organizations. I grew up in a thing called Jack and Jill that's been around forever. So there are these moments where families of color have gathered or executives of color have gathered, but typically you find that it's only for Black people or it's only for Hispanics or Latinos. And so it's very isolated, and there hasn't been like the network of the networks. And again, what's startling to me that I realize is that by the year, again, 2045, America is going to be a majority racially diverse country. And if you think globally right now, that's already the case. So how come that container hasn't been built at scale for the world's majority? And that was what was so shocking to me. And so decided to go out and build that, and decided, let's take the best elements of all these existing networks and let's put that into 2045 and let's improve upon it. So as you think about YPO, like the cornerstone of what they do is a forum. It brings together groups of 6 to 12 individuals. They meet regularly. It's very strict in how they show up and how they are expected to engage. The confidentiality that goes into that, the commitment that goes into that. And while that's great, they don't have consistent space. So they might meet at somebody's home. They might meet at somebody's country club. They might meet, wherever the case may be, and they may or may not involve their family members. And so I thought, well, let's call it a council. So we have a council. So for the professionals of color that are in our network, they get placed in a group, 6 to 12 individuals. They can meet in person or virtually. And because our community may not necessarily belong to country clubs at the same rate that the YPO community does, let's have a dedicated space. So if you find yourself in New York, we have a dedicated space, the 2045 Clubhouse. You can show up to the Clubhouse whenever you want, 5 days a week. We're open from 9 in the morning to 9 at night. We host a wide range of events and activities, and you can host meetings. And it's a club meant for our members, and that's where they do their councils. If you're not in New York, you can do it virtually. So we took those elements. We also recognize that, one of the powerful things about like a YPO is that it's so senior in nature that there's commonality amongst the members because they can relate to wealth, they can relate to family building, they can relate to running organizations. But at that level within corporate America, there's not enough representation if you look at communities of color to do something like we're doing at scale. So the vast majority of our network are people who have between 10 and 20 years of professional experience. And at that stage, call it roughly your 30 to early 40-something-year-old, they're thinking about family for the first time. Maybe they're building their family. They're like at that VP level. They've gone through a lot of obstacles, but they haven't gone through all the obstacles. So there's commonality amongst our members. And at that channel, companies can't afford to lose that talent. Because if you can retain that demographic at that stage, you can have them cross over into like the next rung of executive leadership. You just got to really invest in them at that stage in their career. And so that's where we focus. So we take a lot of the learnings and lessons, and ultimately my vision is to have many of us attend Davos, but have our own version of Davos one day, where we bring together the world's leading professionals of color. We set the agenda. We talk about where we think the world's going and what we need as the majority. And when that moment happens, I know that 2045 will have been successful.
There's just so many things about that I really like. The Clubhouse in particular. One of the ways you really get to know another person is spending time with them. I found that some of my best relationships, people I trust the most, it wasn't because, we did this deal or that deal. It was just that, I got to know them informally. We spent time together without agendas. Virtual, I do a lot virtually. So it's not that I'm opposed to virtual, but I really like that in real life component that you have, because it's great to just drop by, right? You say 9 to 9. If you're in New York, and I know you're opening in other large cities, how great is it to drop by at 10 o'clock, run into a couple of people, oh, hey, and then you have just a conversation that wasn't on an agenda, wasn't on any kind of formal thing. I find that you mentioned conferences. Now there's been some notable changes recently in conferences trying to kind of reinvent them. But people tend to be much more formal, and this is all people I find, right? Much more buttoned up, and a lot of the good. I used to joke when I went to a lot of conferences. The best part of the conference was like at the bar after the conference was over, right? Because that's where people were really being themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that the other thing that is great is you're focusing, as you note, you're focusing on a level that is going to ascend to that top C-suite area. What are some of the common concerns, worries that you find in that cohort? And I'd also like you to talk about you have two ways of joining. An individual can join, and you could also do a deal. You've done deals with Pfizer, some McCann, Ford, etc. Talk me through that. But let's start with what are you, as you're sitting in these conversations, is there something that emerges just kind of as like a common theme, or are you like, wow, I never knew people were thinking or talking about that?
So I would say the thing that probably gets overlooked the most, that if you don't identify being of color, you wouldn't recognize, is that for folks like me, right? 99.9% of the time, I am in the minority. I live in Connecticut. There's no place that I would go where I'm going to step in and I'm going to be in the majority. 2045 is the Clubhouse is such a rare opportunity for me and all of our members to physically show up to a location where we are in the majority. That literally never happens. And there's just power in being in a space that for the time that you are in the Clubhouse, you escape reality to some degree because you are not the only. And so all of the commentary and feedback that we get is that people feel safe. They feel like they can be their authentic self. And when people say, oh, what does that mean to be your authentic self? It means that you don't have to think about how you're laughing, that you don't have your corporate laugh versus your social laugh. It means that you can dress the way you want to dress without being concerned about how people may judge you. It means that you might choose to dap somebody up rather than shake somebody's hand. Being your authentic self means that you don't have to worry about all those other things you have to think about when you're entering a space where you're not in the majority. But that doesn't happen for us. And so our community members just having a space where they can just be is by far the most powerful thing. And it's something that I fully didn't appreciate until I received the feedback from others. Because again, it's like this weird thing that like our community knows that like we're never in the majority, but when you find yourself in it and you can consistently tap into that feeling, I haven't had that opportunity previously. So I think that's been the consistent feedback across the board from all of our members. And it's what I feel every day when I go to the Clubhouse. It really takes my breath away because we're on 45 East 20th Street. Like outside of that Clubhouse in that area, you're not going to be in the majority. And so it's been amazing to see. And then in terms of the corporations that we work with, we're really fortunate that we got the benefit of the doubt because I built Jopwell. So my first company became the largest diversity recruiting platform in the country. I built the company for about 8 years. At our peak, we're about 150 employees. We work with 400 companies. And we were really the first for-profit diversity recruiting solution in America. And when we sold the company a little more than a year ago, and at that point I was the executive chairman of the company, I was thinking about what I wanted to build next. Because so many companies use Jopwell to diversify their workforce, we got the benefit of the doubt when I went back to those companies and said, I have to help you retain that talent now. And so we're coming up on a year. We have 40 large corporations that work with us. And they trust us that we are going to do right by their employees. And so we take that responsibility we know that it's a responsibility. We take that seriously. And so we value quality over quantity. We value deeper, larger relationships than, working in a really transactional way with an organization. For a company to partner with us, table stakes, it's a 2-year commitment. We don't do 1-year commitments because this work isn't completed over a year. So we're very intentional about the companies we choose to work with because we're going to invest a lot of time, energy, and resources in our brand into that organization. So we take that seriously. And so all of that is on the B2B side. On the B2C side, if you're an individual and you're not from a large company, you're an entrepreneur, you're a professional athlete, you're an actor or actress, and you want this community, this space, we allow you to apply. And if you're willing to engage and you're willing to be present and show up, we'll allow you in as an individual. And so it's both B2B and B2C. The B2C is kind of what gives the space the vibes. It's what keeps it active during the day. And the B2B is where we have larger relationships and we could be more influential with workforce development and inclusive executive coaching and a lot more offerings. And so I think both need to exist in order for 2045 to hit all of the right tones.
One of the things that I found very compelling about your business plan, your mission, is that, you've said endlessly, listen, this is not about quotas. This is not about, you've got to do this because, fill in some sort of political reason. What you stress is, no, you've got to do this because you want to retain the absolute best people. You want to have people with super high agency stick around. And the thing that I just loved about that is you are really looking at just very sensible ways to retain what, as you point out, will be the majority of the population. If you don't have that and 2045 comes around, you're kind of maybe out of business.
Companies, CEOs have a responsibility, like increase shareholder value. Make sure that you're being a good steward of your company. If that's true, and you're looking at a macro perspective, you have to have a workforce that truly understands what these consumers want. That, like, America is going to look like my daughters. My daughters are Black and Lebanese, and you look at them, they're racially ambiguous. Like, they're going to grow up so differently than how I grew up, and that's what America is going to be. And you have to have a workforce that starts to understand that, like, hair textures, and like skin tones and like products you're putting out into the world are going to have to evolve to meet the needs of these consumers. It's good business. And if you think about, like, people push back and say, oh, that's not fair. You have programs for certain demographics. Well, equal is different than being equitable. And it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if you go back to, if you just want to remain relevant and you want your company to thrive, if there's a population of individuals within your company who are disproportionately impacted and being affected, you have to put things in place to close that gap. That's an equitable solution. That's okay. That doesn't have to be politicized. There's a group of individuals that are valuable to your organization. You need to retain that talent. So you have to put things in place to support them. Otherwise, you're going to lose that talent. And if they're going to continuously be disproportionately impacted. That's not to say another group's not valuable. It's not to say you can't invest in other groups. It's missing the point. The point is you're trying to increase shareholder value. There's many ways that you go about that. But the most important thing you have to protect are your people. So your most important asset. Many companies say that. And so you have to meet your employees where they are. You have to recognize their existence in the workplace and outside the workplace. And you have to be able to have empathy, communicate transparently. You have to talk about why you're doing certain things. It's human capital. It's human capital management. It really is. Like, it doesn't have to be this labeled thing. This is just building good workplaces.
Yeah, and you are particularly good at using, like, when a political aspect comes up, which I really dislike, honestly, because what it's like we've been over politicizing everything, in my opinion, and you're particularly skilled at diffusing those kinds of conversations, and you advocate the Socratic method for having them. Give us an example of, the other thing I really liked about you is it's people actually talking to each other. It doesn't matter if you're white, a person of color, whatever. It's just human beings talking with each other and not grabbing on to that. I hate labels, right? And that I'm an X, right? And well, what does that mean? What walk through how you use the Socratic method to get people to think, oh, you know what? Maybe I've been thinking about this all wrong.
I think all of it just comes back to understanding and trust. Like, you can understand somebody's perspective or how they got to where they are, and they understand that by you asking them questions, trying to get to the root of like where their form of understanding comes from. It's not challenging them. It's trying to understand them better so you can get to a place of like, aha, I get it. Let's build from there. But if you can't find common ground or things that you can both agree upon, it's hard to engage in any conversation. I mean, with my wife, we have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, 2 girls. And when we get into the heat of the battle, I'm like, wait a minute, let's take a step back. We want our girls to have the most fulfilled life in all realms. Is that right, Jules? Like, is that accurate? And like, we'll find understanding in that. And it's like, great. We're on the same page. We're on the same team. Let's build from there. Let's make decisions with that common goal in mind. What does that look like? Let's talk through it so that when we butt heads, at least we know that we're trying to get to the same place, the same outcome. Now it's much easier to work through those things because we have the same intention. And it's the same thing when it comes to any of these conversations. It's like, can we all agree that we all want to feel like we belong? We all want to walk into a place where we feel like we can just show up and be and not have to think 30 steps ahead. Like, can we agree on that? Because if the answer to that is yes, then let's also unpack, how do we get there? Because it might be different for me than it might be for you. And that's okay. And let's talk about why those things might be different, because now you're going to get to know me in a side that you probably wouldn't have gotten to know if we didn't find that common ground. So I think all of this comes down to conversation. It's assuming the best intent. It's giving grace. It's giving space. It's thinking about an individual in the context of them being an employee and a colleague, but also somebody outside of work, and just getting to know them. And if you understand like who I am when I leave this place, you might be able to relate better to me, or you might be able to understand why I do the things that I do the way I do them. And maybe we can build from there. So it's I don't know. A lot of it feels like common sense to me.
I think I might have even said that to you when we decided to invest in you. It really does seem like common sense to me as well. And one of the things that just has been irritating me for a while is this sort of this false binary dichotomy that everyone wants to impose on other people, right? Like, you're either this or that. You're for or against. I don't know how many humans you have talked to recently, but your average human isn't like that at all. And so I love the idea of, hey, wait a sec, let's just take a step back and find out where we all can agree and then build from there. I like the win-win aspect of the way you're approaching this.
Yeah.
In the old days of Wall Street, firms were highly segregated, not by color, but by religion. Basically, Ben Graham, the famous author of The Intelligent Investor, couldn't give Warren Buffett a spot at his firm because he basically said to Buffett, I have to reserve that for a Jewish person.
Well,
And so, like in the old days, Merrill Lynch was the Irish guys, Goldman Sachs was the Jewish firm, and then like that existed for a long time, and then it all just like disappeared. And I think that there might be a lesson there, and I think you've got the right approach. I think one of the reasons it disappeared was because people were like, wait a minute, like he's got really good ideas. Why aren't we wanting to hire him? Like that doesn't make any sense, right? And I also think that the era of, for all of the Sturm und Drang of social media, like, oh, it's so horrible and all these things, I think one of the things it does really well is it allows people to discover people they might not naturally bump into around the world. And I think that's the way I've used it. For example, my team is globally distributed of all hues, religious creeds and everything. And it was just because I had this huge opportunity to watch people do their thing for a while. And then the ones that I was really attracted to, I would approach and we start a relationship. But it also gets back to what you've said several times. That's how you build trust. You build trust by, going back and forth and just seeing that person time and time again, kind of doing the thing that they said they were going to do, and so what are some of the programs that because I know you bring speakers in, I know you have the forum like YPO. What do you think is the best of all the things that you're doing that really does help kind of cement that trust? Because after you get to trust, that's where all the really great stuff starts happening.
Absolutely. So I think the best thing we do, it starts with us setting the expectation of what it means to be in the 2045 network. And like anything, I think, you're in power when and if you have leverage. And I think the leverage that we impose upon our members is that if you want to remain in this network, you have to be an active and engaged individual. And we are very clear around what that means. So if you're in the Clubhouse and you see another member, our expectation is that you go up and you introduce yourself. And we try to normalize that. So if we don't see it organically happening, we'll make it happen. We'll say, Sean, do you know Lucy? Lucy, do you know Sean? And we'll put people together. And there's that, jumping off of a diving board sensation when you want to introduce yourself for the first time. But we find that just by doing that one action, it really starts their journey in 2045. And it's become this culture-like thing that people have come to expect. So now it's normalized. So as a member, if you've been there for a while, you go up and you introduce yourself. And the reason for that is because I belong to a country club. And I wish that had happened to me when I first joined. I wish it was like a normal thing to approach new members and shake their hand and say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. How can I help you?" And I had my crew and people who sponsored me and whatever, but there's still this feeling of some people are just not approachable. And even though we belong to the same club, I still feel awkward at times. Like if I'm sitting by myself, it's not normal that somebody would come and just sit with me. Right. And so I hate that. And I don't want to build a club where that's the case. If you're going to be in this network, you're going to engage. And I think once we have established that, then the executive coaching, the councils, the dinners, the fireside chats, all the things, all the other programming elements, it just takes it to the next level because you're not sitting awkwardly and not knowing the people next to you. You've bumped into them, you've talked to them, and we force relationships. And I think that has been an accelerant to the trust being created between our members.
How do you approach the mentoring and the coaching segment? Do you have is there a formalized course that you ask mentors to go through? Walk me through that.
Yeah. So this is all on the B2B side. So as a company, if you choose to sponsor your employees to have access to 2045, those individuals get 6 hours of one-on-one executive coaching with a certified executive coach. So that happens either in person or virtually, and you schedule the time as it works for you. You could do 6 hours consecutively. You can do once every other month. It's for you to use those 6 hours however you see fit. The councils, you get access to 6 councils a year. And typically that happens every other month. And so that's on your calendar. It gets added so you know when it's coming up. You can see the people that are in your council and you can engage with them before or after. But again, that's 6 of those, and those councils are 90 minutes each session. Then every month we have dinners for what we call 2045 leaders. Those are the individuals that are sponsored by their company. And at those dinner tables, you can, in the Clubhouse, you can meet other leaders outside of the council. You can form your own table. You can bring folks together. It's a space to meet other members and to break bread. Every month we have a fireside chat where we bring in a notable individual. It happens virtually and in person. So depending on where you are at the time, you can do it in person or you can engage virtually. But it's a chance to learn and listen to, incredible leaders. We've had Miguel Michelli. We've had who's the co-founder of WeWork. Danny Green, NBA player. I mean, a wide range of incredible individuals across all different industries that you get a chance to engage and meet. And then you get the ability to have access to our networking. So every month we have a social where it's for all members, the B2C side and the B2B side. And in the summers, especially, we have this incredible group. And then you can bring friends, and it just becomes this incredible event that I love showing up to. And so it's like a camp. I mean, you get out what you put in, and you meet people and you build relationships. And our vision is that, wouldn't it be incredible if this existed in every major metropolitan area around the world? And then we have our coming together once a year for all the chapters of 2045.
And at those events, do you find that there are significant differences between, say, a New York chapter versus an LA chapter? And if so, how does that emerge and show itself?
Yeah. I think the major difference are the industries that are represented. In New York, it's a lot of finance, tech, consulting, law firms, more of like the industries of the tri-state. Out west, it's a lot of creatives and entertainment. And so I would just say probably the biggest difference would be the industries. But what's been amazing, and we've done things in Canada, in Montreal, we had a little meetup. And what's amazing in the consistency is just breaking bread with impressive people who look like you. And you're like, I don't get a chance to do this. And that's consistent. And so when you take these groups and you put them together, which we haven't done yet, we haven't had our annual thing. We're not a year old yet. But I anticipate because I get to see it, I selfishly have bounced around to all these different groups. When we bring everybody together, I think that, and which we're going to do early in the fall, it's going to be really cool. I can see it very clearly.
What has, and I know it's early days, but what has been something that happened that really surprised you? In other words, you're like, whoa, I was not expecting that.
I would say, and everybody warned me about this, but I didn't fully appreciate it. It is really hard. So it's really hard to do multiple businesses inside one business. And that's probably not where you thought we were going to go. But it's been surprising to me how hard it is to manage a physical space, manage a B2C business, and manage a B2B business. Those are 3 different businesses. And it's doable, but it is hard. And so our learning and lesson, and the most shocking thing, is that the space matters, but it's the people who choose to come together that matters the most. And so the space could be a restaurant, it could be a townhouse, it could be a club, it could be somebody's home. That's actually not as interesting as it is the people who choose to gather and how they choose and the engagement that they do. So the insight for me, as I think about scale and how we take this globally, is that we will always have dedicated space, but it may not be space that we do long-term leases on. We might do it in partnership with other organizations who have space, but they're not activating the space, so that there could be consistency for our community to gather and network, but it takes away the burden for us to have staff and all the things that go into managing a space. It's a big operation to do that. So if we can remove that burden, then at least we're removing 1/3 of the complication of what it takes to run a company like this. And so in California, we're about to launch our second location, and we're doing it at a existing club where we're getting our own dedicated space within that club, and our members will have access to all the amenities of that club. And with that, we don't have to have a really robust physical operation because we're leveraging the assets that existing network, the existing club infrastructure has already brought to the table. And that's been really exciting because I've identified other potential opportunities around the world where we could do something similar. So now we're back to looking at a B2B and a B2C business, which is something that I think I could do and manage relatively well. So that's just been from a entrepreneur perspective, that's been a really interesting thing because it's my first time entering into this type of space where it's beyond just technology. There's gathering. And you would appreciate this because you're like me and many entrepreneurs, like as long as we're learning, it's very enjoyable. And so I love learning every day.
One of the things that I noted was there's certain things that I would just rather outsource. You know what I mean? Like I've watched my friend Brent Beshore and my son Patrick build this capital camp into this amazing gathering in Missouri every year. And I had an opportunity to talk to the guy who actually runs the logistics of capital camp. And wow, what an eye opener that was, because it's hard. It is really, really hard to pull off all of that stuff simultaneously and flawlessly. And so are you pursuing, it sounds like you're kind of pursuing that on the physical space locations, yeah?
Yeah. So one of our lead investors is Tishman Speyer. And we chose them because they have physical spaces in 36 global markets. They're, behind Rockefeller Plaza in New York. They have a lot of incredible assets around the world. And they have several businesses that are contained within the container of Tishman Speyer. One's called Studio. And for their larger tenants, they have spaces called Zoe Spaces. And it's a competitive advantage for us to have them as an investor because they have space. We can activate that space and keep it dedicated to our members when we activate that space. But they are a tremendous partner for us to have because of that. We can scale globally because of that.
And are you finding similar ways to work with other organizations that allow you to kind of plug and play in the same manner? Or what walk me through about how you are building out your own internal staff and colleagues to address certain areas, like B2B is very different than B2C. Mm-hmm. So how are you building out your internal group of employees?
So the beautiful thing, and probably and a potential risk that investors take investing in this type of business, is that this business works, and it works really well if the community chooses for this to work, right? Like I can build the container, but at the end of the day, the community has to choose to leverage that container, show up and engage. And so how that then translates is we rely heavily on our community to do the programming. They tell us what type of programming to do. Many of our community members raise their hand to be moderators of the different events that we have. They invite their networks. And when that flywheel gets going, it's a very beautiful thing to have happen because it's a win-win-win for everybody. So from an internal building perspective, we don't have to hire full-time employees to do a lot of the things that you may not realize, because the community is willing to do it. They want to do it. They feel like they are taking ownership of the community. So again, they want to host these events. They want to do the invites, and when it works, again, it's great. And if that's not working, then it becomes really expensive, because we have to hire everybody to do those actions, and that becomes really expensive. So we've taken the approach of having as small of a team as possible of a full-time employees, but leveraging and tapping into the community as much as possible, because we want them to feel like they, in large part, own the experience, that they're driving the experience, and we are there to be supportive of that experience. So where we invest in headcount, it's on sales, it's on operations, some marketing, technology, but we're not investing in things that a healthy community should want to take ownership over.
Yeah, which is a really clever way to approach it, I think, because why reinvent the wheel if there's all sorts of people out there who you can partner with?
Yeah, and also it's if the business is working or not. You get to the answer, being an early stage investor, like you are, being an early stage entrepreneur, like you want to get to the answer quickly. You want to understand, like, is it working? And if it is working, what's working really well? And then triple down on that thing. So you can uncover it. You can uncover it a lot quicker, I think, in this type of framework.
Let's shift gears for a minute, because I recall you telling me a story about you met Magic Johnson. And I thought that was a really cool story, and I would love it if you could share it with our listeners and viewers.
Yeah, I'm fortunate to have many stories with Mr. Johnson. I'll say this: he, out of all of the investors of Jopwell, he was an investor in Jopwell. Investors say they promise you the world. They're going to open their relationships and they'll be there for you, and on and on and on. He has upheld that more than anybody else, to a point where, I felt it became, he's like an advisor, mentor, friend. It went beyond an investor. And how that played out was, the first time I met him, we get a phone call that said, Mr. Johnson's in New York City. He would like to meet you before he invested. Like, are you available? And I was like, yes, I'm available. And like 45 minutes later, I was standing in the hotel where he was staying with my co-founder. And I remember, actually, he opened the door, and I remember thinking, do I call him Magic Irving, Mr. John? Like, what? And he's tall. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a basketball player, and I was just like, I was fumbling on my words. And he quickly recognized that, because I'm sure I'm not that happens 100 times a day to him. And he daps us up and welcomes us inside, and we sit down, and I think the most impressive question and back and forth dialogue I've ever had with an investor happened in that meeting, where he said to me, I've done my research. You played basketball at Yale. Talk to me about how difficult of a transition it was for you to going from being known as a basketball player to starting your career at Goldman Sachs. And I almost got emotional, because it's the first time I think somebody recognized that, like, when you're a college athlete, everybody knows who you are on your university. You don't have to introduce yourself, like, and your whole life leads up to that. You've been training every single day for hours of your entire life for that D1 opportunity. The day you graduate, it's like cold turkey. And when you transition into the workplace, I can't put it into words, but for somebody to recognize how difficult of a transition that is, and that was a part of the investment dialogue, I was like, he gets it. Obviously, Mr. Johnson gets it. And again, thinking about relationships and forming trust, like from that question on, I have viewed him as, again, a friend, a mentor. And, my parents, it's led to my parents meeting him in Miami during one of his portfolio retreats. He was gracious enough to allow my parents in the room to watch Ryan and me, my co-founder, myself, talk about the business. And that was such a great moment for my parents because they, I get to experience all these amazing things, and they're never invited, but they were invited to that because he recognized how important that would be for my parents. So I have like fabulous photos with them. And I was in Chicago one time and he happened to be there. And I was with one of my employees and he was like, come out to dinner. So my employees got a chance to engage with him. And I got invited to his house and he was doing a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton. I was fortunate enough to be invited. And afterwards, he, grabbed me and brought me downstairs and I looked at all his trophies and his trophy room and on and on and on and on and on. And again, like he's my favorite investor. Yeah, he's been more than that. So
That's such an awesome story. Do you find that recruiting like people who were former D1 athletes, I've seen a bunch of studies that athletes, ex-military, had like some additional benefits that were pretty specific to their having come up that way. Are you finding the same in your own hiring?
100%. And going back to the story with him, I think one of the reasons why I was so emotional when I was answering that question is because, as we talked about, I went to Yale. And so every time, and again, like I don't think people think about this. Every time I would meet somebody and they would say to me, what college do you go to? I would say Yale. Without hesitation, they would say, what sport do you play? And the presumption was the way I look, could not have just gone to Yale. And the reality is I did play basketball, but I was also a tremendous student. I went to Lawrenceville. I'm a trustee of the school right now. Like, it was one of the best academic schools in the country. And I probably would have got to Yale just by academics. I also just happened to be really good in basketball. And so I always fought against the notion to make it awkward. When they said, well, what sport do you play? I would say, I don't play a sport. And I would just see how they would react. So part of the conversation with him was, and this gets back to your current question. He was like, listen, never let somebody like put down what it means to be an athlete. Like, being an athlete is, you are the perfect individual to do anything in this world. You understand communication. You understand what it means to be a team player. You understand execution. You're competitive. You can multitask. You go through, you stick it through. You go through journeys. Like, you're somebody that you would want to be in the trenches with. Like that's who you want on your team. That's somebody you want to be working alongside you. Like, that's what an athlete brings to the table. So don't let somebody take that away from you. And I needed to hear that from him because he's one of the best of all time in basketball, one of the greatest business people as well. And he is only that because he can leverage books. And so I look for that. I look for athletic mentalities. I look for people who have all the traits of athletes, whether they played sports or not. I look for that mentality. And those 100 out of 100 are the best employees that I've ever hired.
That the question, what sport do you play? That's really interesting to me because that opens a window for me, right? My daughter was Yale 2010, and my son-in-law got recruited to Yale for two sports. And I bet very few people ask him, what sport do you play when he says Yale? Like, those small things those are really good to hear and know about, right? Because first off, I find that really insulting on your behalf. But that's I love the way you turn that around. And what were some of the responses when you were like, yeah, no, I don't play any sport? Was
just like awkwardness. Just very awkward.
Yeah, I would just love that.
Yeah. It's one of those things again where it's like, if I say that to my friends who are Black, went to an Ivy League school and they happen to play sports, they're like, I was so tired when people like it's this thing that like it's why 2045 exists, because we can talk about those things and we've all lived through them personally. And to the outside world, it's not bad intention. I think they're trying to figure it out. So I'm not mad at the person, but they need to be taught a lesson. And I think that there's a polite way to teach that lesson by just being like, I don't play a sport.
Well, it's polite, but it's also really funny, because that gives you the opportunity. It gives you the opportunity to just watch them try to process that right in real time. Because that's really
like, are you sure?
I really love that. On top of everything else, you've also written 2 books. Talk a little bit about that. Like I said, you are like the trifecta here, man.
No, I don't know about that. There's probably 2 things that allow me to like reset. One is playing golf. I'm very passionate about golf because it's the only time where I can be outside for 4 hours without a phone and be in the moment and not focusing on other things. And I find that writing is a similar experience for me. So those are the 2 worlds that I can escape. And I chose to write a book for the same reason why I do a podcast called Race at Work, which I did it with Harvard Business Review, and I do a weekly essay with Fast Company about topics that are interesting to me. I choose to do these things because it allows me to have a dialogue that I would have one-on-one, but to do it at scale. So I remember trying to break into tech, and reaching out to folks who look like me, who were either investors or entrepreneurs when I was about to leave Goldman Sachs to build Jopwell. And none of them took the time. One of them took the time to actually meet with me. And his name's Michael Seibel, former head of Y Combinator and one of the greatest individuals of all time. He took a meeting with me when he didn't have to, and it really changed the trajectory of my life. Jopwell went through Y Combinator, and Michael backed us, and YC backed us, and we got increasing work. Like, that all was because Michael took that phone call. But I reached out, and I won't mention their names, but I reached out to many people, and he was the only one that said yes. So I remember thinking to myself, if I'm ever in a position where people reached out to me, I would take the phone call. So for the last decade, I block my Fridays, and that's when I take those phone calls. So I'm intentional about the days when I take them, but I take them on Fridays. It's every other Friday. If somebody messages me, they're trying to get on my calendar and they want to know how I did the things I've done, I take the call, and it's an intentional block on my calendar. And what I was realizing is, especially my most recent book, which is called Let Them See You, and I did that with Penguin Random House, is that the questions I was answering were all similar. And it was basically, how do we as professionals of color show up in the workplace and leverage your diversity as an asset? And the entire book is about that, because I felt that would be the thing I could give back to these conversations and say, here is a documented way to think about it and navigating corporate America. And that's why I chose to write that book.
And do you find that people who come not in through a corporation, but through the B2C, where they apply for membership, have they read the book? Have they read the articles or listened to the podcast? Is that where you're finding the most interest?
Yeah, I'm fortunate that I have a relatively large following on very specific platforms. So LinkedIn, I have a relatively large following, and I put a lot of my thought leadership, or I guess it's perceived as thought leadership. I put a lot of content on that specific platform, and I have found my lane and the people who respond best to my content. So if you have heard about 2045 or you've come into the community, it's probably because you engage with me on LinkedIn. That's the platform of my choosing. A lot of the corporate partners I connect with on LinkedIn. And so I find that leveraging social media and understanding which platform is most on brand for you, where you have the best reach, is something that's worthy of an investment in. And so I spend most of my social media time on LinkedIn.
What do you think that people who should be long to 2045, but are hesitant, or, maybe that's not for me, like, what advice would you give to them in terms of, like, no, absolutely, this is for you, and here's why, and not just the things that we've already talked about, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a really long list of things where people would go, wow, I get an opportunity to do this, I'm going to jump at it. How do you get the more reluctant and or introverted or shy, or what, fill in the blank,
Yeah.
who's just kind of thinking about it?
Well, I would go back to one of the catalysts that propelled me to start 2045. I was coming home from work, and at the time I was running Jopwell, and this was in like 2019. And Jopwell was a large business at that point, doing very well. And I was in New York City, and I was going from Union Square, which is kind of where the office was based, to Upper West Side, which is where I was living. And I took the subway home, and normal commute during rush hour. What started out as a normal commute during rush hour became anything but normal, in that there was a white woman standing directly across from me, professionally dressed, looked like she was also coming home from work. I had my earphones in, but we locked eyes. As people know what that is like in rush hour when you're traveling in New York City. And she was saying something to me, and I wasn't really paying attention. I took my headphones out, and she was, I don't know, calling me mean words, I would say. And I was like, that's a little weird, but we've all experienced that in New York. So I put my headphones back in, and I was like, let me just not pay attention. And then my stop was about to come up, and she kept staring at me. So I took my headphones out again, and I asked her, can I help you with something? And she looked me dead in the eyes, and she called me the N-word. And everybody heard it around me. And it was like time stopped. I remember people pushing me out of the train. Everybody was yelling at her how disgusting she was, and surrounding me on the platform, being like, are you okay, sir? I'm so sorry that happened to you. That woman was disgusting. And I remember time starting again. And I remember in the moment when she called me that, I remember thinking to myself, I can't react, because if I react, I'm going to be the angry black guy. I'm going to be the person who started it all. So I remember thinking, don't say anything. And I started walking home. And at the time I was, I guess my wife now was we were just engaged, or right before we got engaged. And I shared what happened. And I was like, I'm not just going to let this sit with me. I'm going to write about this, because I have this large following. If it's happening to me in New York City, if it's happening to me, and if it's happening to me in New York City, it's happening to everybody. And I wrote about the story, and I was very public about it. And it kind of went viral. It got republished in all these different, publications and websites. And the most incredible thing happened. The community came to my defense. So in the comments and across the internet, Black Panther had just come out. I had cast members writing and saying that they had my back, and that this also happens to them. And everybody kind of surrounded me virtually. And I felt for the first time like I belong. And that word of belonging, it's like, well, what does that actually feel like? I felt like I belonged. And I was like, wouldn't it be so cool if I could always feel like I belong? What would that look like? And that was kind of, there should be a club for us. And so this is a long-winded way of saying to that person who's hesitant to join 2045, unfortunately, something's going to happen to you. You're going to feel isolated, and it's going to be because the color of your skin. And when that happens, you're going to need a community of people who it's also happened to surround you. And we'll be here to support you when you're ready to join us.
Wow. You've never, that's the first time I'm actually hearing that story. So, first off, congratulations on the way you reacted. Congratulations on writing about it so that other people see like, oh, like maybe this happens a lot more. Because a lot of times people who, for whatever reason, have some idiot spout, nonsense to them. They bring it inside themselves and they feel like, oh, this is just me. And so what a great thing to do, that it's not just you. It's like it happens a lot. Unfortunately, there are a lot of ignorant people in the world. Yeah. And what a great way to respond to that. I love the proactive nature of that, because that's how you loosen, I think. Though I don't know where those attitudes come from. I mean, honestly, it's like it's just maddening to me. But what a great way to respond in a very positive way, and then also make it very plain for those people who were like, "Oh, wow, if that can happen to him, all right, I'm in. I love it." Well, so kind of wrapping up, but what's the vision for? Are you in every big city? Are you international? Well, tell me about the longer term view.
So where we currently are is that we have our physical space in New York. We're going to have our physical space in Los Angeles at the end of May, which we're really excited about. We have about 80% of our members are based in the tri-state. 20% are spread out throughout the US. So everything we do is in person, but there's also a virtual component. And if we're having this conversation in 7 years from now, I would say that there is a 2045 in all the major metropolitan areas of America, but also including smaller metropolitan areas. We are in large cities around the world, and we are having our annual gathering for the network on maybe Martha's Vineyard. We'll see. Maybe our own island somewhere. and we are bringing the CEOs of our companies that we work for. They're gathering, and we are figuring out ways to continuously keep our companies relevant. And our voices are going to be the most heard voices in the room. And I think that's where we'll be in 7 years.
I absolutely love the positive way that you are approaching this. That's why we invested. We just think everything about what you're doing is the right way to get to the result that everybody wants, right? Like, nobody wants to exclude talented people. I don't think. There might be that, like the idiot on the subway. Maybe she does. I don't know. But the vast majority of people want to retain their most talented people, want them to be involved. And like, I just remember being very excited after we talked a couple of times that, okay, here is a very practical, proactive, win-win way to get to a place that everyone wants to get to anyway, right? In terms of retaining the best people and making them feel like they're part of the team, making them feel like, this is just normal now. The way I perceive it, I think that is absolutely fantastic.
Well, we need, for our vision to be a reality, we need CEOs of companies to champion this type of relationship. We need senior level executives saying, this is the program that we're going to institute throughout this company. Again, like, I'd rather work with fewer who want to do the work than just focus on whatever, not doing just having surface area vanity metrics. I want to do real work with companies who want to do this. And it takes C-level buy-in and commitment, long-term commitment. And for our vision to become a reality, that also has to be true. And it's going back to the community. Like, if this is going to work, the community has to show up and engage. That's on them. If we're going to work in a corporate sense, the CEO and the C-level leadership teams need to make this work. We're going to be in the business of executing and building the containers, but we need the partnerships on both ends.
Yeah, and that was the other thing that I loved about it, because it truly is those who engage, those who do the deep work. That's a really big competitive advantage to have.
Totally.
And man, I would much rather be on that side than the people who are like, I don't need to worry about that.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Porter, this has been absolutely fantastic. You might know that at the end of all of these Infinite Loop podcasts, we wave a magic wand and we make you the emperor of the world for one day. You can't kill anyone. You can't put anyone in a re-education camp. But what you can do is we're going to hand you a magic microphone and you can say two things into it. And the two things that you say into it are going to incept the entire 8 billion plus population of the world. Whenever their next morning is, everyone on the planet's going to wake up with your two ideas, and they're going to think that they are their own ideas, and they are going to do something very different. They're going to say to themselves, you know what? I'm going to actually start acting on these two ideas today. What are you going to incept in the world's population to make things better for all of us?
First concept would be to be a good person. Just be a good person. And then the second thing I would say is learn from somebody today. Those would be the two things I would say and do and hope people would do.
Both would, I think, make the world a vastly better place if we could all of us wake up thinking and doing. That's the important part. It's the and doing part. Tell our listeners and viewers how they can find out more about you, more about the organization, et cetera. We'll have it all in the show notes, but.
Yeah. So the website's 2045studio.com. I'm Porter Braswell. Probably my most active platform is LinkedIn. If you want to see families of my photos, that's all I post on Instagram. So you should find me there. I'm very basic. And reach out to us. On 2045studio.com, you can contact us if you're interested in being a corporate partner, if you're interested in being a community member. You can sign up directly on 2045studio.com. And I hope to see you in our clubhouse at some point too.
Terrific. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. And as you know, I put my money where my mouth is. I think you guys are going to have a really winning combination of need and solution. So I can't say enough about how highly I think about you and your organization.
Well, thank you, Jim. I appreciate the relationship and the investment in this type of platform, and it means a lot. So thank you.